Well, you know we are getting close to the NFL draft when it is time for safety rankings, baby. Typically, one of the last position groups that so many of us get to when scouting players for the draft, and I myself am no different here, but I did have fun getting through this safety class. There's some real talent, some studs at the top, but also some pretty exciting depth. You know, you look around the league. Frankly, the majority of starting players at safety in the NFL were third, fourth round draft picks, and I think this draft class actually has some pretty good depth in that range. So I'm excited to talk about all of it here today. Before we get started, I just want to remind you guys, I will be live right here on YouTube for all 3 days of the draft, giving you my analysis and reactions to every single pick, hanging out with you guys, of course, in the chat. Always one of, if not the best times of the year. So I just want to remind you guys to come back here on the channel for the live stream of the draft. But without further ado, let's get started with my top 10 safeties for the 2025 NFL draft. And if you've been following my position rankings, this won't be a surprise. It's become a bit of a running joke at this point that my top 10 is actually 11 players here. But because of the way that I do my grading system, I am not afraid to give guys the same grades if I think they are of the same caliber of prospect. And especially as you go down the board a little bit, we do have some ties. So here for my number 11/10B safety prospect, I'm excited to talk about Hunter Waller out of Wisconsin. So happy he kind of snuck into this list here because he's a fun player. He is a big, hard-hitting, I don't want to call him a throwback safety, but certainly a bigger-bodied, true, strong safety type. Now, he's definitely kind of a certain flavor of player here, right? Like, not every team is going to be very high on Hunter Waller because he is that bigger, strong safety type. He doesn't have the speed and movement skills out in space that a lot of the guys on this list have. He doesn't have the range and coverage ability to do all of the different coverage assignments that you might ask of a safety. And unfortunately for Hunter Waller, his breed, his type of safety is becoming more and more of a dying breed in the modern framework of the NFL. You hear so much about these two-shell defenses, your split safety defenses, whether it's in the Fangio family, the Mike McDonald family, now the Robert Saleh, DeMeco Ryans family. So many of these modern defenses in the game today want to come out in two high defensive structures with really two safeties that can wear any sort of hat, so you don't know which one's rotating up, which one's rotating down. If you do want to go from a pre-snap cover 4 look and end up in cover 3 post-snap, try to create that confusion. That really is the split safety scheme that so many teams in the NFL are running here in 2025. And if this were 2014, when Seattle cover 3 defenses were permeating throughout the league, we might be talking about Hunter Waller as a second round pick, but his type of safety just isn't needed as much by so many of these teams. But on a positive note, I do think that means that for the hand-picked teams in the league that do actually have an active role for a player like Hunter Waller, who at 6'2", 213 pounds, will detonate the ball carrier. He takes great angles to the football. He has the size to exist down in the box. He's a great tackler that won't just line you up and have those highlight reel hit sticks, but he comes in with really strong arms and wide strikes and consistently gets players to the ground. He does all of the things you want a strong safety to do, except for one key weakness that I'll be sure to hit on here. But overall, yeah, he might be the 11th safety in this draft. But if you really just need someone to play a strong safety, box safety role, and you ranked all the safeties in this class as that role, Waller's second or third in the draft, I think. So if you are one of these hand-picked teams, maybe you are like a Minnesota Vikings where they come out and they run a ton of 3 safety stuff, and naturally one of those safeties is Josh Metellus, who can do a lot of the box safety stuff. Or Likewise, there are some teams in the Mike McDonald system that do love themselves similar 3 safety packages. You think of what Kyle Hamilton does for the Baltimore Ravens as kind of a star big safety in a lot of 3 safety packages there. Or maybe you are still a team like the Detroit Lions that does actually run a lot of single high stuff in the modern NFL, which you don't see a ton today. And there is more of a role for a true box safety. Someone like the New York Jets, of course, that just hired Aaron Glenn, might be a little bit more of a single high heavy team. Again, you could steal some value here in Hunter Waller, who just flies to the ball and is really good in run defense. Now, there is one key weakness to Waller's game, and that is he kind of dodges blocks when he is in pursuit. When he gets near the trenches, he angles himself out of the play when he really doesn't need to. He has the size to detonate blockers. He has the size to show that proper stack, peek, shed, that take on ability. He just avoids it for one reason or another. So I think he has all of the physicality and play strength and demeanor to do that. I just think it's something that you're really going to have to coach into him because, you know, he's not the guy that needs to bend and contort himself around blockers heading his way. He can actually attack that gap and hold that gap and get off of blockers to make plays. And he flashes the ability to do that. It's just very few and far between. So if you can work on that, like I said, you are getting a potentially great run defending safety. And while you don't project him as this great versatile coverage safety, I don't want to also act like he just can't cover it all, because if he couldn't cover it all, he wouldn't be making this list for me. He is still a practical coverage player. He's not horrifically slow. He's got a 4.57 40. Like, he can run a little bit. He's got a good first step. I think sometimes when he turns and runs, he shows some good hips. So I think athletically speaking, he certainly has enough to cover tight ends and bigger slot wide receivers and, you know, move in zone and take away throwing windows. It's just there are some aspects that he's going to need some development there. Just very up and down in terms of his zone coverage. There was a lot of plays where I saw great anticipation and route recognition, and, you know, he defends play action and there's that crossing route developing behind him and he just kind of naturally flows with it and he knows how offenses are trying to attack him and he takes away those throwing windows. There's other plays where he's either over aggressive, he tries to cut off stuff underneath, or he just doesn't feel things developing in general. So hopefully that stuff can develop a little bit. Teach him how to take on blocks, and that's where you could ultimately end up with my high-end pro comp on Hunter Waller is Josh Metellus, who's a really good big safety for the Minnesota Vikings. Love him as a fit for Minnesota as a 4th, 5th round guy. Maybe you don't want to pay up big money for Josh Metellus down the road. You could start to groom a replacement there for someone that's like 28 years old, but you know, we described some of the other teams that might have a bit of a role for a bigger box type of safety like Hunter Waller. Happy he made this list and we could give him a shout out here. Now, before we go to our next player here, I just want to remind you guys, you can get access to my entire draft rankings on my Patreon. I have watched 17 safeties, so obviously 6 of them didn't make the video here today. If you want my thoughts on those guys, and that list is going to get north of 20 players by draft day as I finish all of my evals that I can before the draft. But not just safeties, every other position group. You can get similar information to what you're seeing on the screen in this video and even more. Written up strengths, weaknesses, pro comps, you name it. It is all there on the draft guide on Patreon. Also, this upcoming weekend for the MVP tier on Patreon, I will be doing 8 7-round mock draft videos for all 8 different divisions. So every team is going to get a 7-round mock draft. Those are going to be flying at you throughout the course of this upcoming weekend. Really, once I get my linebacker and offensive line rankings done, I'll be able to do those. So the perfect time to really support my channel and everything I've got going on here with the draft and the NFL season and deep dives and otherwise. You can show your financial support for the channel, but also get a handful of exclusive content there as well. That's patreon.com/thatfranchiseguy. But now let's go to my number 10/10A player. Again, a 4th to a 5th round grade here, and someone that could potentially be a starter in the league. That is Billy Bowman out of Oklahoma. And you can effectively take everything we just said about Waller and flip it on its head. Completely different player, and it's kind of the perfect example of why we can end up with ties in the rankings when these guys are nothing alike, but ultimately end up with the same grade. So obviously Billy Bowman, a much smaller, more athletic, coverage-oriented safety at 5'10", 194 pounds, really tiny arms, 28.5-inch arms is pretty damn brutal. We'll talk about how that impacts his game, but ran a 4.42 40. You watch his tape, he really moves well out in space. Didn't do his agility testing, the 3-cone and the shuttle and all that, but I'm really not worried about it. He's got those oily hips and the stop-start ability to really be a sticky coverage player on the back end. And that shows up in his really impressive ball production. He disrupted 20 passes in his time at Oklahoma, converted 11 of those for interceptions, but the down in, down out coverage stuff too, even when he's not getting his hand on the football. Love the way from a quarters alignment, he can kind of see that deep crosser or a post heading his way, and he can match it up and turn and run. He can anticipate routes top down. He's got that kind of snappy route squeeze that we described in my cornerbacks video, where if someone's trying to run a hitch route or an out route underneath his coverage, he can not just anticipate it mentally and react quickly when the receiver begins his break, but he's got the physical tools and the acceleration to jump on top of it, and the fluid hips to turn and click and close on some of that stuff. So he can take away a lot of those underneath developing routes, and he's, again, got the ball skills to capitalize on breaking up those passes and oftentimes intercepting them as well. Obviously, with his athleticism, he can man up a vast variety of receivers. With that lack of length and that lack of size, he's not going to be great against big tight ends or thicker wide receivers, but he can, at least attach and stick to tight ends with ease. But if he gets matched up on some of those vertical hitting slot wide receivers, you think of like Ladd McConkey in the NFL, Jalen Reed, or, like a Jalen Noel in this draft class, those types of guys. This is the perfect counter to those types of guys because he's not going to really get stacked over the top on those vertical route stems from the slot when he's covering those types of guys. And then, of course, he can play a free safety alignment. He's got all of the zone IQ and route recognition and anticipation and all that stuff to play a deep single third and, have sideline to sideline speed, but collapse underneath and take away posts and digs as well. Like, just really a good overall coverage player. And you hear me talk about him, and you're probably saying, how the hell is this guy a 4th to a 5th round grade and you're number 10 safety, TFG? Because he sounds freaking awesome. Well, Billy Bowman has, I would say, the most potentially crippling weakness of any player that we are talking about in my top 10 positional rankings. That's a big statement, right? What the hell am I talking about? This dude can't tackle. All 4 of his years at Oklahoma, he missed at least 20% of his tackle attempts. Average on his career was 23%, and the problem is it's not getting any better. 26% in 2024. 1 out of 4 tackle attempts, Billy Bowman missed it. And how does that happen? Number one, we mentioned it already, the tiny arms, 28.5-inch arms is crazy. If there is a starter in the league with arms that short, I haven't heard of them. There might be someone out there, but to put this in perspective of the top 21 safeties that I've got here, and again, 5 of them I've still got to write up, but of the top 21 safeties in this draft, only 3 of them have arms under 30 inches, and the other 2 are 29 and 3/4-inch arms. So Bowman is a whole, 1.25 inches less than that. I can only imagine he is in the 1 percentile of arm length for safeties. And it shows in his game being that inability to wrap up as a tackler. And it leads to bad technique because he has to really hit you and bring some of that stopping power to have the strength to get you down. And it ends up just, he dips his head and just whiffs a bunch. So you can be an excellent coverage defender, but oftentimes we understate the importance of tackling, especially for a deep safety, because when these guys are making tackles, it's often in the alley or deep down the field after a big completion. And if you're missing 1 out of 4 tackles there, it just makes things so much easier on the offense to have those impactful, explosive plays that every defense is trying to eliminate. So as much as we like praising the coverage skills of Billy Bowman, the reality is here, okay, so he disrupted 4 passes in 2024 to 15 missed tackles. He disrupted 8 passes in 2023 to 22 missed tackles. Very similar kind of 3-to-1 ratio of 7 passes defended to 21 missed tackles in 2022. So as much as those exciting highlight plays happen, if on a 3-to-1 basis, you're having just as many plays where you're breaking tackles and opening an opportunity for extra explosive plays from an offense, it just, to me, it's a very likely non-starter for Billy Bowman in the NFL if he can't improve this tremendously. And with that arm length, I don't know that he can. So he is a polarizing player. And that's before we even mention the fact that with that lack of arm length, he can't get off blocks. He has to do what we criticized Waller for doing, trying to kind of, be shifty around blocks and elude blocks. And sometimes he can get away with it. Many times he can't. If a blocker ends up on Bowman, he doesn't have the length and strength to deconstruct and get off that block. So not just the tackling, but the overall run defense is really, really abysmal. And even if he does improve his tackling, you're still talking about, you want to get him in a system that really won't ever ask him to get involved down in the box at his size. We talked about those many split safety style defenses, the 2 high structured systems. If Bowman can improve his tackling ability to the point that you're at least comfortable with him on the football field, I do think in a split safety defense, he can emerge as more of a starter again if he can improve that tackling ability, because those systems really keep you out in space for the most part. If you're rotating down into a curl flat or a hook zone from cover 3, you're at least out in space a little bit more where he can hopefully every few plays avoid his inability to get off blocks by, having that space to work around guys. But if he can't improve his tackling, I just don't know that he can get on the football field, period, other than like 3rd and 20 situations as a true free safety in dime type of defenses. But I think you guys get it. A really exciting playmaking athlete that has one potentially crippling weakness as he projects to the NFL. All right, my number 9/8B safety here, Craig Woodson out of California at 6 foot, 200 pounds. Certainly doesn't have those arm length concerns of a Bowman. Very close to 31-inch arms, very solid there. Excellent athlete, ran a 4.45 at the combine. Good kind of change of direction, agility scores as well. 7.063 cone, 4.20 shuttle, very solid. I think that shows on film as well. He frankly looks and feels and moves like a lot of corners in this draft class. Hell, you could argue he's a better overall athlete than the other corner on his team, Noel Williams. But that shows in a lot of his good coverage plays. Like, this is a guy with a really good starting point as far as his coverage goes. He's been in college for 6 years. I think that generally shows in his zone IQ. He plays a lot of free safety for California. He just does a good job kind of showing that eye balance from deep single high safety alignments. He flows his way into traffic. He's really good at understanding route combinations and when there's 2 different routes kind of trying to exploit him and get him to overcommit one way or another. He stays, again, that eye balance being that term there, stays balanced between those two, and really puts the quarterback in a tough spot where ultimately he'll kind of check off of those options in Craig Woodson's area. My knock there is I think he really tries to do that snap in, snap out, which is admirable. But there was a lot of times when he is in more of an intermediate zone, whether it's a hook zone or a curl flat, where he's really trying to kind of be the hero and still try to take everything away, when ultimately it's like at some point you do have to be in a coverage position. And there were guys that were getting open in his area that he very much could have looked to take away. And I would say a lot of his zone reps did ultimately end up being a little bit loose compared to a lot of the guys' tape on this list. But overall, just really good coverage tape in his final season. With his athleticism, naturally he's a very good man-to-man corner as well. And I like his anticipation and ability to kind of jump underneath routes too when he sees those developing. So it's honestly a very good groundwork. Really all that's left from him from a coverage perspective is just to continue to prove that he is who he showed he is in his 6th year, because the 5 years before that, anytime you have these really late stage breakout players, especially at a very volatile safety position, I think it's important to just like contextualize that, right? And be like, well, where was it the other 5 years at California? And it really wasn't there for him. So, just establishing more of that coverage consistency and proving that he can keep doing this and that this is who he is and it wasn't a blip in his 6th year. But really a lot to like in coverage. Really the main questions on him are going to come as a run defender where, his play strength, he is built more like a corner. So in terms of taking on blocks, he will get stuck on blocks. He's not someone that I think is going to live around the box. He made some plays around the box when he was, able to burst into the backfield unblocked, where he can show off his biggest strength in run defense, which is his tackling consistency. He got his missed tackle rate under 10% his final year, and it was pretty stable all throughout his time at California. So, he really breaks down and wraps up well at the tackle point. I love that. But yeah, just not a ton of play strength to be more of a box safety type. And I do think a lot of his angles to the ball were questionable. He would try to undercut blocks, knowing he's got 4.45 speed, and would get himself in trouble. I think when his missed tackles did happen, it was because of poor angles. And from a diagnostics standpoint, a lot of kind of misdirection and certain play action and stuff kind of threw him for a loop. So, you don't love to see that for a 24-year-old player. I think there's still a lot for him to learn in terms of just sort of the overall technique of defending the run from a deeper safety alignment, which is where I project him playing. Again, not as really a box safety, but either as a true single high free safety where he absolutely has the range, or more of a split safety defense where he can play quarters, cover two, and then, either rotate up into single high or rotate down from cover one where he can be a man-to-man corner or into a buzz zone, all that good type of stuff from those split safety defenses. So a very balanced player with just a little bit more to prove before he can kind of emerge as a starting caliber player. So I liked him. And then honestly, Jalen Reed here, very, very similar overall discussion with different strengths and weaknesses. My number 8/8A player and my first of 2 Penn State safeties that we're going to talk about here today. And Reed had a great showing at the combine, not just coming out running a 4.49 40, which is obviously a really good time for a safety, but certainly surprised me when he measured in at 6 foot, 211 pounds. Frankly, watching his tape, I thought he either played more slender than that or just didn't fill out his frame quite to that degree. Take that for what it is, but I do think the tape we saw in his final year at Penn State, he certainly doesn't play up to the play strength of that plus profile at 6 foot, 211 pounds. You'll see there I've got a C plus play strength grade on him. The block take-ons of a C plus. I don't think he plays with a ton of play strength like that size indicates, but certainly nice that he can be a really nice athlete at that size, if nothing else. And that just gives him a very rounded physical profile for the position. And as far as his tape is concerned, rounded is a very good word for it. I think his tape was just really solid, but I also didn't walk away from his tape wowed like I did rather for, a lot of the guys that we have yet to talk about here today. I thought he was pretty inconsistent really across the board. So, I guess we can just start with his coverage. He's a risk taker, man, whether he's playing free safety or, two shell free safety or dropping into a hook zone or staying, put as a strong safety where he's trying to kind of lurk underneath. Ball skills to break on the ball, an excellent first step to get there. He can click and close from quarters or from a curl flat towards the sideline. Like, there's really exciting flashes when he sees it and he triggers on the ball and you see it and you go, yes, that's a freaking star safety right there. But he's over aggressive. He jumps a lot of stuff that just isn't there. I really worry if you want to put him from a quarters alignment that NFL teams are going to know the beat on him and just run double moves at him. I'd be worried, with NFL teams, whether they want to run double posts or Mills concepts where you're taking a slot wide receiver, kind of running him at the free safety, hoping that he collapses down on an intermediate route. And then you have the outside wide receiver with speed, running a post really into a vacated middle of the field because the outside corner is playing with outside leverage. Really worried that Jalen Reed's going to be especially vulnerable to that type of stuff. And these are the types of things that NFL pro scouting and, coaches really start to stem together and can take advantages of over aggressiveness like that. And he just doesn't quite have the balance as a zone defender in terms of risk management that you love to see. So I think that showed up in a lot of his inconsistent moments from a coverage perspective. But then on top of that, I do think while he can kind of read the quarterback's eyes and put a picture together and kind of have the read and react skills, I do think his more, split second reaction time to a lot of whatever he's trying to cover was lacking. So whether you're talking about he's playing a top-down zone or if he's on the trail and he's trying to react to and mirror the receiver's route breaks, he was just a tick slow to react to the receivers. You talk about like the S2 test and cognitive reaction skills. I would be wondering what Jalen Reed's scores would be in that type of situation, because it felt like if a guy ran a dig underneath him, he would eventually react to it and go cover it, but it wasn't snappy. He didn't have that quick twitch route squeeze consistently like you hope to see from a defensive back. But on the trail as well, he'd be in a position, the receiver would snap off a slant route or a post or a corner route, and he would eventually react to it, but it was, a half step or a full step later than you prefer to see man-to-man. So he's not getting the most out of that burst and the speed that is in there. So just a couple things missing there from Jalen Reed from a coverage perspective. And then from a run defense perspective, I think he's fine. Again, I don't think he played with a ton of play strength. He wants to go for those big hits, so he's going to leave his feet. He's going to lead with his head, and his missed tackle rate was just a little bit outside of your comfort zone. You probably want to see that in the 8 to 12% range to feel pretty solid about it for a safety. And he was at about 14% over his last two seasons. So he misses a few too many tackles. I think, play fakes with that aggressiveness can draw him out of position. So some dings on the diagnostics and finding the ball consistently sometimes takes some over aggressive angles. But at the same time, physical player, a generally frisky player that, he's got some really exciting plays in run defense too in there. I don't want to just completely sell him short. Like when he does connect on those big hits, it's super exciting. There's plays where he shows off the speed and pursuit to win those angles to the sideline and prevent big plays. Like, again, I'm trying to be positive on him as well. It's just there are certainly some negatives that are potentially going to hold him back in the NFL. So the pro comp I went with on him is Juan Thornhill. Really reminded me of his game as kind of a do-it-all safety that just over-aggressiveness hurts him at times and non-elite run defense, but still pretty good. Balanced player that I think can emerge as a starter in the league. So we got a 4th round grade on Jalen Reed here. No relation, by the way, to Jaden Reed out of Michigan State a couple years ago. Had to look that one up. But that does wrap up that cluster of round 4 and 5 players there. And we now jump up to guys that I'm considering on day 2 of the draft, starting with Malachi Moore, our first Malachi on the list today, out of Alabama. And at 5'11", 197 pounds, he is one of those safeties under 30-inch arm length, just under at 29 3/4 inches. So again, not down there at 28.5 like little T-Rex arm Billy Bowman, but still not great length for sure. 4.57 40 is very average for the position. Just not a super traitsy player here in Malachi Moore, but man, is he steady Eddie back there. Played over 3,000 snaps in his time at Alabama, including another 500 on special teams, by the way. So even if he's not starting out the gate, he's going to come in and compete in that phase until he kind of hopefully earns a starting job for you, or that job opens up, or someone gets hurt and he steps in and doesn't look back. But I really do think he comes in really with the floor of someone that's gonna put himself in those conversations with coaching staffs in camp, depending on the room, of like, man, is this guy really already one of our 2 best safeties on our team? At Alabama, man, he just has a really complete profile. Super smart, competitive player. We can start with his coverage ability. Again, is he going to have crazy range on the back end? No, the 4.57 speed shows. His speed tops out pretty quickly, and, they would put him in single high, and, he wasn't too much of a playmaker from the back end. He would eventually get there with his, taking good angles and good tackling and clean stuff up, but that's not going to be the best way to use him. And he really projects well in one of these split safety style defenses where he's kind of playing out in space, but not consistently playing single high coverages for you. But from those split safety types of coverages, with the exception of when you want to rotate him into cover 3, which he's not a total liability. Again, he's just not a huge playmaker from cover 3 or cover 1 single high. But all of the other stuff that these sort of, Fangio, Saleh, Mike McDonald systems, a Sabanese style defense here at Alabama want to ask of him, he can handle. I think from quarters, he plays with great anticipation. He squeezes routes from underneath, jumps on top of them. He's got really quick feet and good burst to close those things in kind of shorter areas than you would typically see from more of a single high type of assignment. So he can do that. Love what he does, buzzing down into a hook zone. Really has a good feel for the intermediate aspect of the field, how routes are developing either in front of him or behind him, and he just kind of naturally flows and navigates his way in front of passing windows, forces QBs to go off of reading his area. And he's a quick enough, fast enough athlete too, with decent size to kind of man guys up. Is he elite at it? No. Guys, if he gets stuck trying to cover a crossing route against a fast wide receiver, they will pull away from him. If they get him matched up on a vertical stem, they can stack on top of him. So that speed is something you've got to kind of protect and be aware of. It's going to lead to some losses, but for the most part, can get in a guy's hip pocket, carry them into the second level, do all that good stuff. And, one area I do just want to praise his athleticism because it stands out on tape. His foot speed, what we're categorizing as agility here, is exceptional. He just runs his feet extremely fast, and it allows him to kind of be ready like a cat to react to whatever he's processing. And it just lets him generally play faster than I think the 4.57 speed indicates. It really was just a standout trait in his game that impacts him positively both in coverage and in run defense that I just had to mention on him in there somewhere. But it is a transition to his run defense, which is just really good relative to his listed size. Again, he's undersized by his combine weigh-ins, 5'11", 197, shorter arms. Just based on the tape, you could not convince me that he has 14 pounds less than the last guy we talked about in Jalen Reed. I think he plays at least as strong, but he's way more physical at taking on blocks. And again, this sort of agility, the rapid, aggressive feet that he's able to play with really helps him work around blocks too. He'll stack you, but his feet are ready to pounce and get off blocks. It just, again, that agility just helps him in so many different categories. But in terms of the skill and awareness as a run defender, really, really good. Not a huge surprise for a defensive back that played for Coach Saban for 4 years. But he processes things extremely well from the back end. Not overly fooled by play action, but he's not late to react on runs either. So he'll see things and trigger really well. Takes good angles to the ball for the most part. And just as we've come to almost expect from Alabama defensive backs, at least the ones coached by Nick Saban, exceptional tackler. Even if he has shorter arm length, this is where that foot speed, the agility really helps him. He's able to break down at the tackle point with the best of them. And if someone tries to get into the sort of stop, start, stutter and go, or tries to juke him, that agility just shows up so well at the tackle point and compensates for that lack of length. So, there's just so much to like in his game. He's in my opinion, just a really good run defender, especially relative to his size, even if that size can work against him at times. And I don't have any defining weaknesses in coverage, even if he's not the most rangy, high-end playmaking coverage defender either. So really high floor player. My pro comp on him is Xavier Woods. Very similar size, speed, profile. Has been a long-time starter in the league, but not someone that you're going to write home about and give a bunch of accolades to either. So to me, that's a third, early fourth round type of player and should be in the mix for a starting lineup right away. And then we just kind of reload the barrel. And again, we'll be talking about a very similar player in Sebastian Castro out of Iowa. 5'11", 203 pounds, better arm length, 30 3/4 inch arms. But ran a 4.59. Not going to wow you with his size or speed really at all. And because of those lack of traits, you're just not going to project him as a high-end difference-making safety at the next level. But damn, is he a steady football player and has been at Iowa for years. Now, he's a little older. He's a 24-year-old, 6-year player. But that experience absolutely shows in his game. And, unlike maybe Craig Woodson, Sebastian Castro has been really good for as long as he's been on the field for Iowa. In fact, he was better in 2023 when I was expecting him to be a day 2 type of pick and someone that was going to emerge as kind of this, I'll just say, maybe where people talk about Jahdae Barron a little bit, maybe not quite the same, but the sort of conversations maybe we had about like Mike Sainristil last year, kind of having him emerge as the best nickel in the draft conversation. And things just went a different direction for Castro. He played a lot more of a true safety role at Iowa. The ball production wasn't quite there. Enters the kind of pre-draft process a little bit more quiet. Runs a 4.59, and now it's more of, okay, he's more of a, mid-range prospect, and hopefully he can carve out a nice starting role in the NFL somewhere for an NFL secondary. And that's still not a bad spot for Castro to be. Definitely one of the smartest players on this list. You look at the way he plays those intermediate zones, especially, just a great understanding of how offenses are trying to manipulate him, as that sort of bind defender, but he's able to spin it back on the offense. He plays those high lows super well. When he's in a curl flat, he knows exactly how to play with the quarterback's eyes and, almost juke him with the way that he's playing that high low and force bad throws out of him. And he's got the ball skills and ability to break on those out routes and corner routes really, really well. But I think he anticipates routes really well. He can read receivers' hips and feet, and again, just understands what types of routes are coming his way, and he can jump on that type of stuff. He can play man-to-man. He can get on the trail and react to guys' route breaks. Now, all of his coverage is just dinged by the lack of high-end speed. Like, it just, overall, it just increases your margin for error. If he's got a false step, he just doesn't have the recovery ability. He's not complete in that sense where he's got the great traits and the IQ to go with it. He's a little bit more maxed out in that sense, but I still think he brings a nice floor to the table as a coverage player because of his IQ, and he is a fluid mover. He does have a good first step. It's just the long speed falls off pretty damn quickly on him, and that's reflected by the 40 time. But another big reason Castro ends up relatively high on this list, I'm about as high as anybody on Castro. I don't think it's abnormal to see him at safety 6, but I have seen rankings where he's into the teens, for example. But a big reason he makes the number 6 ranking for me is actually the run defense on top of being a solid coverage player. For a guy that's 5'11", 200 pounds, defends the run super, super well. And I would say his play strength is a tick above what we talked about with Malachi Moore. That would be the main difference between a Castro and a Moore here. And even better play strength, in my opinion, than like Jalen Reed, who's listed a good bit bigger, right? But he is stocky, compact. If tight ends or slot wide receivers try to block him, he can take you on like a linebacker. He has that technique that we've come to learn and see and love from these Iowa defenders, where he'll stack peak shed on you. Like, as a defensive back, it's super impressive. He's got great eyes in the backfield. I think his run diagnostics are exceptional, especially for a guy, and we'll have to talk a little bit more about this, but he spent so much time as a slot corner. I think in the reps where he did play safety, he still sorted through the run really, really well. He sorted through play fakes and found the ball, and he takes great angles to the ball as well. So even if he is a guy that has played a lot of time as a true slot corner, I think the reps that he did play as a safety showed you that his IQ is going to translate to more of that role in the league. Honestly, outside of the speed hurting him at times in coverage, the only other real knock on him is the tackling. He does miss a fair amount of tackles, and I think this makes it even more sense to have Castro and Moore tiered together, because I think Castro takes on blocks better, whereas Moore is a more consistent tackler, but both very similar caliber run defenders in my opinion. But with Castro, whereas Moore had those insane athletic, agile feet to stay in front of guys, you do see Castro kind of get juked out of his shoes. Guys will change direction on him, and he can change direction. He does have good feet, but it's just not a standout trait for him. So you do see him just get out athleted at the tackle point. And he missed his fair share of tackles. 16% missed tackle rate, to be exact, is at least somewhat concerning, to have a negative note there on Castro. But I know you don't scout the helmet, but there has been so many guys just like Castro. Some of them, honestly, I didn't even think were as good of college players as Castro, that have turned into useful defensive backs out of this program, out of this kind of cover 3 system that has changed a little bit over the years, but it feels like their defense is just plug and play, rinse, repeat year after year. And there's a reason that translates to the league. Like, you don't go to Iowa unless you love football and want to work and play physical and be a smart guy. And we've seen this time and time again. Micah Hyde, Geno Stone, Desmond King. My pro comp on Sebastian Castro is Amani Hooker. These guys are all cut from the same cloth. And, I know the saying is don't scout the helmet, but I think there are exceptions. I do. And it's obviously not the only reason I like Sebastian Castro, but it's a nice little cherry on top to say, we've seen this before. Amani Hooker, who's this kind of, is he a slot? Is he a safety? Oh, he's not fast enough. He's, all this, the physical tools aren't there. Okay, but the tape is damn good. He's super smart and he's physical, and he's been a really nice starter for the Titans. So I see a lot of that in Sebastian Castro, and I'm willing to bet on him to get an opportunity to get some starts and probably not look back from that point forward. So really, really liked his game. Let's go ahead and move on to my number 5 player in Andrew Makuba. Super, super fun, rangy, playmaking safety who doesn't have a lot of size. But I do think the argument is there to say Makuba is the best coverage safety in this draft. And you think back to, I think there's going to be a lot of people comparing Makuba and even Billy Bowman, who was our number 10 player on this list. Makuba isn't a great tackler, but he doesn't have the potentially crippling tackling deficiencies of a Billy Bowman. So if there is a Red River rivalry type of debate going on between these two players, not only do I think Makuba is even a little bit better in coverage, he at least has NFL level length at 30 inches and is just a overall better tackler. Remember, Bowman missed 26% of his tackles in his final season. Makuba missed 14% last year, which is still in kind of not great concerning territory, but you get the point there. But likewise, we can kind of make the same points about Makuba as a coverage defender. Both Texas and Oklahoma run a very similar style system. These Big 12 defenses, it feels like they all kind of run these split safety style defenses where occasionally you're going to ask these guys to play some single high and rotate over the top. And really whatever they asked Makuba to do, he thrived. As that single high center fielding guy, he's got great eye balance. He has exceptional ball skills, really good at just feeling routes developing underneath him while almost kind of out of the corner of his eye while he reads the quarterback's eyes. He's not over aggressive like a Jalen Reed, for example, to just always trigger and try to be that playmaker. But when he sees it developing, he anticipates it and he can make a beeline for the ball with his exceptional speed. And he had 11 pass breakups, 5 interceptions in his final season. Really, really good tape as a free safety, which is hard to find from a college prospect. It really is. Hell, it's hard to find that in the NFL. But from quarters, he's got the fluid hips. He's got the athletic ability to turn and run. I wish he anticipated routes a little bit better. So hopefully you can, get just a little bit of a quicker trigger if he's in quarters and someone's running a dig underneath him or a hitch. It's just a little inconsistent in that phase, reacting to those quick breaks and squeezing that space quickly. But there's still good reps in there. It's not a liability for him. There's just room to improve there. I would say likewise man-to-man. I think very similar criticisms that we had on Reed in that sense. I think some of the quick twitch reactions are maybe a little bit slower from Andrew Makuba. So when he's on the trail, someone might snap off a slant route or pull a double move. He might be a half a step late to react to that kind of stuff, but he's got really good recovery speed. Even sometimes when he does lose a half a step in those shorter, tight coverage situations, he can make up that ground really quickly. He also did a really good job man covering tight ends as well, by the way. That's where, the 30-inch arm length, that's nothing special, but it's enough and it's useful to deal with those bigger tight ends. And he's just good at kind of navigating around those tight ends and finding the ball before the tight end finds the ball. So he impressed me in those spots as well. And one coverage asset we didn't mention from him is in those hook zones. When they would buzz him down, lurky defender, just great instincts to kind of feel routes developing around him while he reads the quarterback's eyes. Just great instincts in that area of the field. So really a plus coverage defender. Again, in my opinion, the best day one coverage safety in this draft. Now, the problem is while he's more playable and his tackling deficiencies aren't a non-starter for him like they were for Billy Bowman, he's a one-dimensional player. He's even smaller than Billy Bowman, at least weight-wise, 5'11", 186. He is slender. He is built like a small corner. So forget about asking him to play any sort of box role. Fortunately for Makuba, as we described way out the gate with Waller out of Wisconsin, most systems in the league are going to be just fine with that. with him not having to play around the box a whole lot. Even in these split safety types of systems, you can do your best to make sure he's the one rotating deep if you are going to rotate into cover 3 and bring a guy down towards the box a little bit more and have more of a run fit. But even in those situations, he's got a little bit more space to navigate his way away from blocks and use his speed and athleticism to his best. So I do think he could play in a split safety system and be a starter in that way. He just would be a little bit more one-dimensional, and opposing offenses could try to do some stuff. Sometimes you can use motion and make sure that Makuba is going to have to be the one with the run fit and kind of motion towards his side. Like, there's things you can do offensively that could target Makuba a little bit more as a run defender if he is a full-time starter. So that's just, there's going to be some deficiencies in his game in that way. But where I really like Makuba is in these 3 safety defenses that are actually pretty prominent in the league right now for a variety of teams. We've mentioned Minnesota, but Houston does this a ton. The Chargers, the Ravens, the Seahawks, a lot of these Mike McDonald style systems have run a lot of 3 safety type of stuff. In those packages, there is room for a just true free safety where he's staying single high over the top, and you don't have to worry about those rotations forcing him to have more of a run fit. And I think of the way the Texans used Kalen Bullock last year, where they could bring him in on maybe a third of their snaps. And even this isn't like a full-time starting role, but Bullock had 10 pass breakups, 5 interceptions last year in this role for the Texans. And he had a lot of deficiencies in terms of run defense and coverage consistency. I think Makuba is a much better overall player coming out than Kalen Bullock was. But talk about a guy that, even if he isn't a full-time starter, he can just do something as a rangy safety on the back end that so few guys can do. And that brings value into the second round, like an elite third down back or like a designated pass rusher type. Like, there are these specific roles in teams, whether it's offensively or defensively, that even if you're not starting every single snap for you, you can still make a major impact. So if there's a world where his lack of size and his lack of play strength actually keeps him out of a starting role in the NFL, there are still certain team fits that could get a real impact from him. And that's still exciting. So a fun player, not going to be for everybody. There's going to be some NFL teams that are terrified of his run defense and have 4th round grades on Andrew Makuba. And that's totally fair, to be honest. But if he goes to the right spot, it's a guy that could be getting you 4 or 5 picks a year and swing some games for you. All right, next up, I have Nick Emanwari out of South Carolina as my number 4 safety, actually with the same grade ultimately on Makuba, but that's essentially irrelevant because these guys couldn't really be any different. The grade just happened to come out the same. But Emanwari is a guy I am unfortunately lower on. Back about a month ago, the combine happens. He comes out at 6'3", 220 pounds, 32.5-inch arms, runs a 4.38 40, but not just that, he literally jumps out of Lucas Oil Stadium with a 43-inch vertical jump. 138-inch broad jump is just wild. I mean, wow. The testing profile on him, how could you not be enticed by the theoretical upside of Nick Emanwari? And after the combine, sure enough, we're seeing mock drafts, putting him in the top half of the first round. And I was excited to watch him at that point, right? I hadn't watched him yet. And I loaded up the tape. And unfortunately, my reaction was just, oh, he doesn't play anything like a 6'3", 220-pound freak athlete at that size. Now, he's fast. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not saying the athleticism didn't show on tape at all, but man, the theoretical point of you being that athletic at that size is that you bring the nastiness as an enforcer from the back end, and that's just not his tape at all. Now, I will say this does come into that category of, is it what he was asked to do versus what he can't do? And that's ultimately going to be a major factor in whether or not he's good, is kind of how that major question mark lands at the next level. Because in this system at South Carolina, this was one of those split safety, 2-shell heavy defenses. So they're taking a 6'3", 220-pound Eman Wari and playing him 12, 15 yards off the line as a split safety style starter for them, and just taking him out of the box, where the idea of Eman Wari is this exciting guy down in the box. Think of Jamal Adams in his prime and Cam Chancellor and these guys, and what those guys were able to do as quasi linebackers. They're eliminating him from really having a great opportunity to A, do that stuff, and then B, develop the ability to do that stuff as well. So I will at least acknowledge that. And if I'm off on Eman Wari and he goes in the first round and he's a dominant box safety, it could ultimately be the case of what was he asked to do versus what can he do. Now, that said, it's not like there were never opportunities to evaluate how he will play as a box safety and how physical he plays and how good he is as a run defender. There were plenty of those opportunities. And just as a starting point here, as a split safety, it's not that you're excused from filling the run. In fact, it is very critical that if you're going to run quarters and have a light 6-man box, especially when your defensive tackles are TJ Sanders and Tonka Hemingway, who combined for about 570 pounds between the two of them, it is actually critical that you can diagnose the run and trigger and fill from quarters alignments, step down as a, rotating cover 3 into that curl flat area, or as a buzz safety. It's still your job to have a run fit from those alignments. And Nick Eman Wari was either painfully slow to process the run or woefully indifferent to defending the run. And I don't know what's worse if you're projecting him at this size to be an enforcer of a player. I don't know if it's worse that he couldn't process the run or that he didn't really care to be that physical of a player. Either way you slice it, consistently the ball would get snapped, it would go to the running back, and Eman Wari is either still in his backdrop or still looking around trying to see where the ball is. And that just completely eliminates the point of not just being big to get involved against the run, but of having 4.38 speed, because, he's already a step or a step and a half behind where someone like a Castro or a Malachi Moore would already be. So if you're projecting him to play up to his size and be a good run defender in the league, the run diagnostics have got to get better. Whether it's an effort thing or a, coach and develop thing, they just got to get better. There's no way around it. And, you watch Eman Wari's best plays as a tackler, like he's theoretically a great tackler, and he didn't miss a ton of tackles in college, but when he did, it was almost always because of those slow diagnostics where he's out of position. Sometimes he would take some bad angles, but I think it was mostly a diagnostics problem where he's late to react and it hurts his pursuit to the ball and he finds himself out of position. And as great as an athlete as you might be, you're going to miss some tackles in those situations. So that was painful, but it doesn't stop there, unfortunately, with being critical of his ability as a run defender. Man, at his size, he is not good at taking on blocks. And you saw this, sometimes they would line him up in the box. I think he played about a quarter of his snaps ultimately pre-snap in the box. But he would get, absorbed by blockers, poor technique to throw his hands and stack and use his size and his length to his advantage. It's got to get better. Again, whether it's an effort thing or a technique thing, poor to there. But especially concerning when he's running the alley, if it's a swing pass or he's hunting someone down towards the sideline and he's got smaller tight ends or slot wide receivers coming up to block him, he should be like, there were 185-pound receivers that would run up to him. He should blow those guys up. He should detonate those guys like they are a fly in his way. And he just doesn't take on blocks with physicality. And at that point, if you're 6'3" and you're not using your size and your length to your advantage and your theoretical play strength to your advantage, all you are is just an easier target to block for those guys. So he would way too often get stuck on blocks in the alley. And that was frustrating too. So that's all just as a run defender where I was just woefully underwhelmed by Nicky Manwari. And just one more thing. I'm sorry. I know I'm just dunking on him. But he was, what do I have at 100 and he was 121st among safeties in college football in average depth of target. He's a guy that's praised for his tackling consistency, but so many of his tackles came after 7-yard gains. You know, he just wasn't able to impact the run in a positive light. I will finish his run defense rant just with some praise, because I want to do better at least highlighting the upside and some of the good stuff. I did 4 games on him. There was some small flashes. If you really squinted, you could see some small flashes. There were a pair of short yardage goal line reps against LSU where they put him in the box, have to have it situations. When he had a fire lit under his ass and his team really needed it, he showed some good block take on ability and played like a linebacker down in the box on 2 specific snaps against LSU. So that was good to see. And then there was another moment, a single play against Kentucky after 10 straight runs, successful runs. Kentucky was just running all over them, in part because he wasn't doing his job to fill his gaps. Eventually, he said, enough of this, and he flies downhill, gets off a block and makes a great tackle around the line of scrimmage. And it was like, all right, it's in there. Can we get it out of him with any semblance of consistency? Because as I talked about, it's just not there. Now, we do have to talk about his coverage. I'm not going to spend quite as long on his coverage. I do think this is where his best stuff comes out. I think especially as a buzz defender or a curl flat defender in the intermediate area, he has really good reactionary instincts where quarterbacks are trying to drop a ball over his head or don't think he can get the depth to make plays over the top. You know, one of his interceptions, I think it was against Vanderbilt or Kentucky. I could be wrong about that, but he completely takes the cheese on play action. So you can see some of the diagnostics problems, but you can see the athleticism, the recovery speed. He turns around, recognizes the route combination, gets back, turns his head around. It's a beautiful interception. Those are where his best moments come, as this kind of rangy player over the middle of the field. And it's, you know, you get excited about those moments. He had the pick 6. Was that the LSU game, dropping into the curl flat where the QB just doesn't think he can get from the line of scrimmage to the sideline that quickly, and he does, and he houses it. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, there are some moments where he is a game-changing coverage defender in a few spots throughout the year. He also is a complete tight end eraser. Like, just physical traits alone, he can take tight ends out of the ball game, so that's great. And then there's the occasional play where when he really sees it, and he's right, the athleticism is really fun. The speed, the range, to get himself into playmaking range. He had a pick covering a deep crosser where he just, the speed, again, I'm sorry I can't remember who all these plays were against, but you know, when he sees it, the speed does come into play. But he's not a great coverage defender either. There is a reason he didn't do his agility scores at the combine, I believe. He's 6'3", 220. Naturally, you can be the freakiest athlete on planet Earth. If you're 6'3", 220, you're not going to have the fluid, easy hips of a lot of the guys we've talked about and are yet to talk about. So when he's in those quarters assignments as a split safety, doing what South Carolina asked him to do, he struggles to click and close, and he can get set up by route breaks and get ditched by receivers' route breaks. And then I also think when they played him as a deep zone defender, you really did feel some of the lack of play recognition and route recognition and some of the lack of anticipation show up. He doesn't have a lot of reps where he's playing a deep safety and, makes this great coverage play. He was pretty conservative. I would say he was overly conservative on the back end, didn't have that risk-taking balance, didn't bust a ton of coverages, which is nice, but you want to see the other side of things too. So I think he's an okay coverage defender with some flashes, and hopefully as a young guy, you can get more out of it. So to me, you put this all together, and Emmanwori is a true day 2 traits-based developmental prospect, and I just simply can't get there with the round 1 hype on him. If you take him round 1, the risk-reward is a tough sell for me based on how I view this player. And it's not like he's an edge rusher or a quarterback or some of these premium positions where you kind of have to pay a premium on the traits, right? To do that at safety is very rich, in my opinion, especially for a guy whose role projection gets a little awkward. Not to revisit the whole evaluation here, but think back to where we started this video talking about where there's only so many like real fits as a true strong safety role in your defense. So many of these teams run these split safety style defenses, and even though that's what he ran at South Carolina and he's familiar with it, I actually don't really like his coverage tape running quarters because of the stiffer hips and the lack of anticipation. I think his best coverage tape comes in where you would typically have a strong safety covering the field, right? Curl flats and hook zones. But like we said, the run defense isn't where it needs to be to project him into that role. And then sometimes these big safeties are actually just best off as a free safety because they've got these long strides and the crazy speed and the range on the back end. It's a fun projection to put him back there with the run and chase tackling ability. But to me, that's like Lewis Seen all over again, where it's like, okay, great. It's all a great idea to say you can put him and play him single high a bunch and he's going to make all these crazy interceptions and show these instincts that weren't on tape in college. But it's a projection. It's not something I'm expecting to be there as a first round pick. You know what I'm saying? Mid-second, third round? Yeah, absolutely. It's worth it. But it just gets murky with his role fit in the league and what he's really supposed to do. I think the best case scenario where I'm overthinking the weaknesses and some of those instinctive plays we saw underneath and some of the good tackling ability out in space, the best case scenario is in that sort of Kyle Hamilton star defender, the Derwin James star defender role, which he got to go back to playing this recent season in a Mike McDonald system, where his length and his speed and his command of that sort of middle ring, if you kind of paint a rainbow, a 3-layered rainbow into the defense, your short, middle, and deep rainbow, that middle rainbow just being Nick Emmanwori's space to just dominate. If everything comes together, that to me I think is where his skill set best projects. So yeah, teams like Seattle, Miami, Tennessee, teams that are running that system that don't have their Kyle Hamilton and don't have their Derwin James, or even Minnesota in the Josh Metellus role is very similar. But these defenses that can really base out of 3 safety packages a lot of the times. And then, yeah, if you occasionally want him free safety, strong safety, and 2 package stuff, he can do okay in those spots. But that to me is the best case scenario for Emmanwori, but it takes the right landing spot. Worst case for me is this is Obi Melifonwu 10 years later. A guy drafted strictly off the traits and traits alone and couldn't even really get on the field in the NFL. I think that the floor is there for that to be Emmanwori as well. So a polarizing player. I guess I'm not going to apologize for spending such a long time on him, but I think it is time to move on to my number 3 safety on this list, and that is Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame. And he is, by the way, going to come in with the same grade as my number 2 safety. Again, a very different overall type of player, but I've got Watts as a top 50 player in this draft, kind of worth anywhere from picks 30 to 40, I wouldn't blink if you took Xavier Watts, because while he isn't the biggest guy, he's got good size, but isn't the biggest guy, 6 foot 204, solid arm length, 31 and a quarter inch arms, pretty good actually. But not a standout athlete, ran a 4.58, stiffer hips, slower feet. Hell, you could argue Watts is the least athletic player on this entire list. But I'm going to argue that he is the best player on this list day one in the NFL. God, this dude just gets the position, man. You start with the coverage stuff, remarkably high intelligence from any variety of alignments. And even though he's slower, right, 4.58 speed, he has great tape as a single high free safety. Just flows in the way of traffic. He can take risks, but also, isn't going to bust coverages. He'll stay back when he needs to. Just perfect eye balance from single high. He can buzz down. He can read the quarterback's eyes, show those instincts in that area. He'll flow with traffic on crossing routes and digs developing him behind him. Just a great understanding of how offenses are trying to attack him. You talk about that reactionary quickness. You put the S2 VR mask on, they throw shapes at you, and how quickly are these guys able to recognize information, process what they're seeing, and communicate what they need to do to their body. Xavier Watts is as good as it gets in that regard. So whether he's in man coverage, where again, he's not the best athlete, far from it, but a guy snaps off his route, Watts mirrors that footwork immediately with ease. When he's playing those top down zones from quarters, a guy comes his way, or a guy stops in front of him on a hitch route, or begins breaking inside on a dig route, he stays on top of it. He clicks, he closes, he squeezes that space between him and his off zone assignment very, very quickly. And all of this combined for some of the best ball production you'll ever see from a college safety. Back-to-back seasons now for the Irish. 20 passes defended for 13 interceptions. So not only is he getting near the ball, but he's consistently got the hands and the ball skills to convert game-changing interceptions for his defense. And this is high praise, but everything I just described is Xavier McKinney in a nutshell. 4.58 40, goes in the second round because of it, but still considered a top 10 safety in the league. Had a Pro Bowl season for the Packers last year. Was great for the Giants. The fact that his name is also Xavier is just a cherry on top. He really reminded me of Xavier McKinney. Now, you got to be an outlier at 4.58 to be that good. It's not unheard of. There's other guys that are slower safeties too that have crept towards the top 10 of the league as well. But another player he did remind me of, if you want to shoot a little bit lower. Now, we'll see what Tyler Nubin, who replaced Xavier McKinney for the New York Giants, ironically. If you want to shoot a little bit lower than the established Pro Bowler and Xavier McKinney, Tyler Nubin was a guy that I liked last year, but pushed him down the board a little bit because the athleticism scared me. I'm willing to learn my lesson on that one, on a guy whose tape was frankly even better and lost even less than Tyler Nubin did in coverage. Now, yeah, of course, the lack of speed is going to reduce his margin for error. He's not going to be perfect. And if he ends up getting matched up on elite athletes at tight end or wide receiver, like, he's going to take his losses just like someone like Xavier McKinney will. But the floor is just so crazy high. And then, as you would kind of expect for a guy with the size and the length and the IQ and the toughness, the run defense is very, very good. Breaks things down quickly, finds the ball, takes good angles. Very similar to Sebastian Castro. He can get out-athleted at the tackle point, and he will miss some tackles. He missed exactly 13 tackles in each of his last two seasons, which it's a ding, right? If he didn't miss that many tackles, I might have him as more of a first-round guy. Like, that's about a tackle a game for the most part he's going to miss, it's not great. So it's a ding for sure, but overall, he finds himself around the ball, plays physical around the line of scrimmage. He's not great at taking on blocks, but he's better than some guys in this class. I mean, hell, he's better than Nick Emanwari is at taking a guy on and getting off a block when he needs to. So he's got enough size and strength to do that. Just exceptional tape. I get it if you want to push him down the board because of the traits. I do. I get it. I did that with Tyler Nubin last year and regretted it. I'm not going to do that again with Xavier Watts on a better player. And every prospect's different for sure, but did make me think back to that whole process last year. And I'm a huge fan of Xavier Watts, who was, up until about 3 days ago, my number 2 safety in this draft. But I got to give the nod to Kevin Winston Jr. out of Penn State, who I just obviously watched recently. And you're seeing this from a lot of people right now, getting to Kevin Winston late because so many of us analysts watch safeties last. It's very understandable. But anybody that did do Winston's eval earlier in the year are sitting back laughing at people like myself who only just now are discovering what this guy could be at the next level. So the key thing you got to know about Kevin Winston is 2 games into his junior season, he's young, 21 years old, he suffered a partially torn ACL and lost his entire junior season. But even then, whereas so many players in this range will say, I'm going to go back to school, right? Just kind of too much tape left on the table, come back for the senior year and prove what he's got. He still felt comfortable, and his advisory committee still felt comfortable saying, what you put on tape in 2023, good enough. The traits you have, more than good enough. Just come out. You're going to go early. And we'll see how early he's going to go here in about, exactly 9 days, right? But, man, you look back to that 2023 season, size, 6'1.5", 215 pounds, great arm length, 32.5 inches. Really good athlete, man. He actually ran his 40 a couple weeks ago, 6 months after the partially torn ACL. And he ran a 4.51. He did not have to do that, right? But I think it shows the competitive energy and the work ethic to do that off of that injury and run a 4.51, which is a really good time. I'm happy with 4.51. Like, if that's all he's got, that's great for his size. I actually think if he was fully healthy and had multiple more months to really rep that drill, because it's a repetition drill more often than not, and a technique drill, is what helps you get those really high times. I think he shows speed somewhere in the 4.4s on tape. The burst, for a guy his size, unlike Eman Worry, he actually can turn in his hips and has some fluid movement skills to run even some more of those sort of split safety style defenses. But I mean, while we're in the process of kind of comparing him to Nick Eman Worry, because it's a natural comparison, right? Talk about a guy with size that really wants to play the run and showed exceptional run defense tape, doing box safety stuff, but also keying on the run and doing good stuff from the back end too, taking, processing the run and getting there with urgency, making those splash plays in the backfield. But Winston would actually consistently line up as a box safety and take on blocks, fight a tight end, deconstruct, control his gap in a way that you never really saw from Eman Worry outside of, again, like 2 snaps in dire situations against LSU. But it's just an awesome run defender. Not always perfect because he was 20 years old doing it in the Big Ten, right? So there were some times where he was a little bit sloppier with his take-on technique. He would miss reads. He would shoot a gap and be wrong, or he would get fooled by a play fake. Like, there are certainly areas of his game in run defense that still have room to grow, but for what he showed as a sophomore, really, really impressive. And the biggest thing of all, 0 missed tackles in 2023. Do you realize how freaking hard to do that is? The only other guy I can really remember something like that happening was Brian Branch. Just elite tackling consistency. Now, he did miss a couple against Bowling Green. I didn't go back and watch that game because I eval'd Harold Fannin like a few weeks ago before I was really even keeping an eye on Kevin Winston. So You guys have to let us know in the comments down below if those missed tackles against Bowling Green from Winston, I think he was charted 2 in that game, came against Harold Fannin, who is excellent at making defenders miss. But either way, he went his whole 2023 season with just obviously perfect tackling consistency. So love everything in that phase. And then, as a coverage defender, that's where you do have to do some projecting. That's where missing that final season really holds him back from feeling great about his coverage ability, but there's a lot to like. I think he shows a ton of flashes in the intermediate, kind of, he's a risk taker, but, he'll jump routes and show some really good stuff there. The man coverage is really good, especially against tight ends. But he, to me, showed when they did run quarters at Penn State, or he would, sometimes you're in a curl flat and you've got a route developing underneath you, and that turns into kind of evaluating his route squeeze where he's starting in space and he's got to react and close that space quickly. I do think he showed a quick trigger to take stuff away underneath with a really good first step. Now, some of the true zone feel and, risk management from a deep third, if you do want to ask him to run that, or consistently taking stuff away, a lot of times he would flow underneath, try to take stuff away or try to jump something, and routes would come open behind him. So there is still stuff from a coverage perspective to work on, but I do like the flashes we saw from him in coverage as well, and he certainly has the traits to do really whatever you want to ask him to do. So he's a special prospect. He just missed his final season, and he's exciting because he is one of these guys that you very well might get in the second round, but it could be as simple as, well, if he played, we're talking about a top 20 pick and a guy getting consistent Derwin James comps. The size is almost identical. I think the movement skills are about identical. And again, some of the high-end plays, what he showed as a sophomore, I don't think it's crazy to say he could have a Derwin James-esque career and be one of the best safeties in the entire league. But I do think his floor, even though he missed that final season, I think his floor is still that of a starting player, a hyper-physical, run-defending safety who's just inconsistent in coverage. So I think even the floor of a Terrell Edmonds, who actually was a first-round pick for the Steelers, one of the more wild overdrafts we've seen in a long time, he's at least started on some teams and been okay. That, to me, is at least the floor. But I think you're expecting, that would be disappointing if you get that, but it's, there's worse floors. I don't think his floor is Obi Melifonwu like I put on Nick Emanwari. So I tweeted this out a few days ago. Kevin Winston is the freak athlete with size that I'm betting on, early second. Certainly, I would much rather take Kevin Winston even in the first round than Nick Emanwari. Not to just make this entire video a Nick Emanwari roast, but this to me is the guy that people should be talking about in the way that Emanwari has gotten all this buzz. But let's do number 1, Malachi Starks. I'm a believer. Not everybody has him number 1 because he is not the traitsiest guy. He's, good size, 6'1.5", 200 pounds. He does have really standout arm length relative to his size, and I think, as I want to talk about, that is a key aspect of, some of his strengths and some of the stuff he does really well. He's got good speed. 4.5 speed is plenty fast for me. You're not going to have some of the speed concerns that we had on some of our favorite players on this list, even like a Xavier Watts or Sebastian Castro, the other Malachi Moore. He's got plenty of speed. But I do think where Malachi Starks is an exceptional athlete is his fluid movement skills for his size. The burst, the fluid hips to change directions, the foot speed to stay in front of guys and have that lateral agility that you're looking for. Really, really special. I'll shout out Brett Coleman, who gets to shout out to you, Brett, if you're watching. We're all jealous of you getting to go to the combine and be like 3 feet from these guys with the video camera. But he was like, Malachi Starks is like a cat out here. He couldn't hear his footsteps. And that was so fun to hear because that's exactly kind of the first thing that I think of with Malachi Starks as an athlete, at least, is just how fluid this guy is. And that obviously translates as a coverage player. I think especially man-to-man, you really see it. I think he's the best man-to-man coverage safety in this draft, and that's why they played him so much as a slot corner. And I think everything we've said to this point is also why I think you'll hear a lot of Brian Branch comparisons with Starks as well. I'm fully game with that. I went with Javon Holland because the top speed, I think, is better than Brian Branch, and they're a little bit different as players. But the same idea where the reason Brian Branch, even if he was going to just be a slot corner, the reason I still had a first-round grade on him was he was just remarkably sticky man-to-man, because not just the foot quickness and the fluid hips, but the reactionary quickness to react to route breaks and stay in a guy's hip pocket. Branch has translated that skill to the league. It's why he stepped in as a slot corner in year one for the Lions and was like a Pro Bowler out the gate. I think you can get that similar trait from Malachi Starks. And he uses that length really well as well. So not only is he sticky in your hip pocket, but he's got the length to kind of keep his hand kind of at the hip and use it to slow you down. And, you know, it's what you want to do in man coverage, that legal holding, if you will, where you're kind of using the backside of your palm to just kind of float it out there as a buffer between you and whoever you're trying to cover. He's just excellent at that. So I love his man coverage. And I think as well, before I get into some of the negatives on his coverage, when he's in a quarters alignment, a lot of that same stuff applies. The quick feet, the quick processing. It's not always perfect. There's still room to develop some of the anticipation, but really good as a quarters safety on the back end, where, you know, I know I've said it a million times in this video, but if he's as a two-shell safety running cover 4, or you run cover 6 and you're on the cover 4 side, but someone tries to run a dig underneath you or a hitch route and tries to stop and break underneath you, he has that route squeeze to recognize it and collapse on that immediately. So really good there. And that all combined for really good ball production on his career. Now, he did have a down year in 2024. You know, maybe some of the stuff I'm going to bring up as a weakness contributed to that, but I think some of it is just bad luck and teams trying to stay away from him, knowing how good he is as well. But between 2022 and 2023, he had 17 passes defended in those 2 seasons, 5 total picks. And really out the gate, he showed off like impressive ball skills too. The pick he had, just like statement play as a true freshman, put himself on the draft map immediately. And I do like guys that break out in the SEC, that have the recruiting pedigree, got on the field right away, and, you know, arguably had his best year as a freshman. Like, I do like that from him. And it's not like he was bad after that. He was just as good in 2023. And then he did have his biggest down year in 2024. But a lot to like and a lot to bet on as a coverage player. Now, there are some downsides to him as a coverage guy. And I do think what I'm about to say contributed to some of the lack of production in his final year. He actually isn't as developed in his zone IQ at large as I think it could be. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, they played him everywhere. And it reminds me a little bit of mid-career Derwin James with those Brandon Staley defenses. They put too much on his plate. They asked him to play literally everywhere. And he had a hard time focusing and having you would have to basically have like all-time great elite zone IQ to make a bunch of plays lining up in a different spot every play. But I wrote it down. So just in 2024, and his role was pretty similar throughout the years, but Malachi Starks played 271 snaps as a slot corner, 246 snaps as a single high true free safety, 270 snaps as a two-shell split safety player, and then another 100 snaps as a true box safety. So as good as he is, he never really got a great opportunity to stick in a spot, develop those reps, and really develop high-end zone IQ. So there's just plays where it does feel like he doesn't always know what he's looking at or looking for. Routes will develop behind him, and he doesn't quite feel it out. He just doesn't gravitate his way towards coverage as a zone defender as some of the best safeties on this list do. And I think you're hoping that can come along in time. And I think you look at the way he was used as an explainer for that. And then on top of that, when it comes to his deep zone stuff as a true free safety, when they would line him up as that center fielder, Georgia does this thing, and they've been doing this for years, and it drives me absolutely freaking nuts. The way they're scheming their defense in so many ways makes it hard to evaluate these players at all three levels. But when they have a safety playing a single high free safety assignment, they have him just drop 25, 35 yards deep and basically treat the rep like it's a kickoff. And you are truly, they don't even really ask you to make plays. They want you to go on the full end of conservative, get as much depth as possible, let the play out in front of you, let the play happen out in front of you. Hopefully our 10 theoretically elite defenders will make the play. But if they don't, we want you to be the last line of defense and just prevent 30-yard touchdown, or anything going more than 30 yards for a touchdown. It's the role that Lewis Cine played exclusively for Georgia, and that's why I couldn't stand Lewis Cine as a prospect, and I was lower on him because they had him doing that every single snap. And it's like, what do you make of this from Lewis Cine? At least in Malachi Stark's case, you've got all this other stuff and instincts to bet on and fluid athleticism and all this stuff. But there's just not really many examples of Malachi Starks getting to play single high and actually trigger and take risks from that stuff. So what they asked him to do hurt his ability to develop a deeper zone IQ as well. So you're hoping that stuff will come along, right? And it is what it is. You can't grade him out as having great zone feel or zone anticipation or any of that stuff. You just kind of got to take a leap of faith that it will show and develop at the next level. And I'm willing to take that leap of faith with Malachi Starks, but I also will grade him out as a C+ kind of zone defender by my grading scale there. And then as a run defender, I'll kind of wrap this up, but there's some ups and downs. The biggest thing for me is I don't think his play strength is that great. He is a slender guy. I'll if there are Malachi Starks haters, but I'll give the Malachi Starks haters that. He isn't great at taking on blocks. He gets absorbed in the run game when they did play him around the box. Ideally, that's not how you're going to use him, right? I love him in one of these split safety defenses or just as a true slot corner. But he is a little bit limited in terms of high-end play strength to thrive around the box. So that's a knock on him. I also think it comes back to the zone stuff we said. His diagnostics weren't always great. He got fooled by some play fakes. He was late to see it at times. He's playing all over the place, right? So he's still trying to figure everything out in terms of processing the game, and it made him late to the ball at times, certainly. So those are the kind of main issues with him on his run defense, but generally speaking, really physical guy, flies to the ball, takes good angles most of the time, and then I still think he's an exceptional tackler. He's just weird because he had 3 games this year, Alabama, Texas, and Notre Dame. And he had 6 missed tackles in those 3 games, but he had 10 total games in 2024 where he missed 0 tackles. And in 2023, he only missed 4% of his tackle attempts, which is like elite territory for a safety. So I still think he's an exceptional tackler. There was just a few games where some ugly moments showed up where he kind of just abandoned his technique. More often than not, one of my favorite things about Malachi Starks is the way that he's able to fly to the football, take great angles, and then still manage to hit guys hard and hit with stopping power while also very subtly breaking down right before he gets there so that if a guy does put on a stop-start juke or a lateral juke, he still is able to react and, use his 32-inch arms and grab hold and make sure he can at least hold on, if not finish the tackle himself, but at least hold on until the reinforcements get there. But so many guys, and I think this is what happened in those games where he started missing tackles, but so many guys that love to hit hard like Malachi Starks does, just come in, they leave their feet, they dive with their head, and they're just boom or bust as a tackler. That was Jalen Reed for me, for example. Outside of those 3 games, that wasn't Malachi Starks. Most of the time, the vast majority of the time, I would say, 27 out of his 30 most recent games, just elite tackling technique, while also hitting hard and having the stopping power to get bigger ball carriers down to the ground too. So I'm still really high on his tackling outside of some of those frustrating moments. But a really fun player that did have a bit of a down year that you ding him for. You acknowledge what went wrong and what he still needs to work on, which for me is it's zone IQ, it's processing, it's stuff any 21-year-old safety is going to have to get better at. But it certainly was not enough to keep Malachi Starks outside of my number one safety and someone I'm definitely comfortable with in the first round. Not a blue chip prospect necessarily or anything like that, but I view him very similar to Javon Holland, who was my number one safety in that draft. Antoine Winfield Jr. was my number one safety in that draft. Very much in that mold as someone that I think can be a top 5 to 10 safety in the NFL. And again, every bit worth the hype in a first round pick. So there you have it. Our top 10 safeties of the 2025 NFL draft. So my remaining positions are linebackers and offensive linemen. Gonna take a few days to finish watching film and get my write-ups done on these last position groups, but it's going to be a sprint, not a marathon in terms of content, all the way up to the draft and then of course through the draft with the live stream and draft grades and stuff. Really for the next 2 weeks, you're gonna have a ton of videos heading your way. Not to mention Patreon, the 7-round mock drafts for all 32 teams heading your way there as well. So the draft content be a-flowing. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know your comments, where you think I'm right, where you think I'm wrong. Who are your favorite sleepers in this draft? All of it. I want to hear your thoughts. But please do hit that like button on the way out. I really appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Peace out.